Hello everyone, this is On Tyranny and a especially fiery version of it because as of this summer, unfortunately, a part of Greece has been given up to the flames. Fires sprang everywhere, more than 50 centers, and with a demoralized and defunded police force, it was practically impossible, despite the heroism of many of the firefighters. Who was to blame? Well, the government, although not exactly articulating it because it would sound so ridiculous, kept on mentioning climate change. Climate change, climate change, many times over, like in some kind of mantra to hypnotize us. Of course, more than 10 people have been apprehended with explosive devices. All migrants, not because migrants are more likely to start fires, but because they're easier to manipulate, being in the poorest conditions in Greece. Some have confessed to being given 500 euros to set whole thousands of hectares to fires. So there's obviously some foul play. And climate change, coming from the mouth of a prime minister who's giving speeches with a book called The Great Reset next to him, always should put us into suspicions. So today we're going to try to disentangle this dark net with a known guest, Professor Anthony Müller, calling in from Brazil. Professor, thank you very much for joining us once again.
Hi, good morning. Pleasure to be on your program. Thank you.
Last time we had an introduction about yourself and about Brazil, and we had a kind of private conversation about the joys of living there. I think for many, well, you're German, so, but for us, for many Europeans, it's strange because it's kind of a close sibling. When we travel to the north, we conjure pictures of snow and cold and beautiful white maidens, some of us. But Brazil, it's far, but it's somehow, we feel a connection there because it's very warm and extroverted, but it's also very, very different. Just by chance, are there any Greeks in Brazil?
There is a huge European immigration, but different from the United States, where I always have met people of Greek origin. I haven't met any, and in the statistics I did not find them. Yes, as I remember, in the United States, in the department, we had several people, especially in the academic world, of Greek origin. But in Brazil, they seem to be rare. There are Spaniards, Portuguese, of course, many Italians, Germans, and East Europeans. They are the prime immigrants. But Greek are rare in my experience, and according to the statistics.
I think we should try and change that. As people will be fleeing from Greece for various reasons. Is Brazil a good place to flee? I'm thinking in conjunction with a global new world order that we see rising everywhere. Do you think Brazil is a good hiding place, or it's just one more country in the matrix?
Well, you have two sides to the coin. On the one hand, Brazil has pretty high obstacles against immigration. It's not so easy as one might expect. And the other obstacle is the language barrier, because even, let's say you come for the first time and you still have not learned or do not know Portuguese, it will be hard to find your way around. Different, for example, from Europe. And any country in Europe, I would say, has English speakers, and you get along. But here it is almost impossible to find in the normal sphere of life people who speak good English, and very strange, I must say, with few exceptions, in general, the level of English knowledge also in the academic area is low. Whether it would be 100%, I would say, in Europe, it may be here, maybe 10%. On the other hand, there are so many places to hide. I mean, you just, and cheap. I mean, outside of the cities, there are huge, unimaginable extension of places where you actually can live, where it's not bad to live in terms of climate and so on. Yes, and it's extremely cheap. So if you have the guts to move out of the city, let's say 30, 50 kilometers already, you can find a kind of farm where you can sustain yourself. Actually, I had a friend who had his place, a colleague, a university colleague, who had a place not far away, and they grew all kinds of stuff and raised all kinds of animals, and so this is easy. And then there are some problems. They have an identity card, and without this number, you cannot get anything. So, like in the US with the Social Security number, you also get a number here, and the procedure to gain residence is not easy. So this is actually Brazil is a country built by immigrants. It is immigration if you also include the part of the imported slaves as immigration. Almost everybody has origin outside of Brazil, with a very small community of the original American Indians, yes, indigenous people, yes. But since the 1920s, actually, yes, the immigration has almost completely stopped. So this is very interesting. There was a mega immigration at the end of the 19th century by Europeans, like Italians and Germans, Austrians, and so on, and Eastern Europe. And in the 30s, it almost stopped. Yes, and since then there has been very little, even little immigration from the other countries around Brazil that would expect that they would move to Brazil. But here again, you have the language barrier. Argentina, Chile, and so on, all these countries.
So in Brazil, they're not good in Spanish either.
They're not good in Spanish either, yes. Interesting enough, yes. It is a very interesting feature, and it has to do with their educational system. The Brazilians, within all these rankings, they are very low in the PISA assessment and so on. They usually occupy the lowest places, and it has to do with their form to teach. It is extremely theoretical and extremely pseudoscientific. Yes. So instead of, for example, using practical examples, simple examples, yes, and so on, in mathematics, counting, that really counting from 1 to 10 is the basis, yes, that they become with this kind of strange theories about mathematics. So people do not know the basic calculations. I experienced the strangest things that I think you would never experience in any part of Europe. It sounds crazy, but I'm sorry to say, I paid something that cost 4.5, and I gave 5 real bill. And he used the calculator to calculate the exchange. I mean, I also experienced in these little shops in the bus station, said I wanted to buy something, and he said he cannot sell it because he has no calculator. He does not know how to use that. So these are strange aspects
And
of
just like last question for migration wannabes to Brazil, does this lack of education and problems with public education, as you mentioned, create huge gaps in the market? Does a highly specialized European or North American, be it engineer, software developer such as myself, translator, writer, doctor, physics, does he have a much better chance because of all that you've said?
Well, you have a small market for that. That's the problem. Of this high quality person. For example, the market for engineers is relatively small. Yes, the country lives from its agricultural
But there's
base.
so many huge cities and construction. Like I've just touched Brazil one.
Yeah, construction is great. Construction is right. Yes, construction. Yes. For this area, surely there is. I was thinking more about
like
engineering,
nanotechnology,
mechanical
and things
engineering,
like that. Okay.
and these.
Well, talking about
yes,
nanotechnology
yes.
and crazy things, let me deliver on my promise, and this second time round focus on actually what caught my attention, and I came to know you, which is an article that you wrote on the Mises Institute called "The United Nations and the Origins of the Great Reset." The Great Reset perhaps needs no introduction, but the short introduction is that the Great Reset is essentially a plan advertised by various international organizations, the World Economic Forum, what was known as the Davos Convention, and the United Nations. And there's a book called The Great Reset, authored by one Klaus Schwab, and this book was sitting indeed in some interviews on the side of our Greek Prime Minister. And as we know, these people, as incompetent as they are in managing our affairs, they're very competent in communication. In fact, politicians are almost like actors, I'd consider them. They just know communication, body language, innuendos, words. They're very good. Usually the ones that do better, they're very good at that. Although the more people get dumbed down, I guess the easier their job is. But you just don't place a book next to you when you deliver a speech at random. I'm sure they have 2-3 people like decorators just setting the set for that filming. I'm pretty certain. I mean, we have one in Ancient Greece Revisited, which is our YouTube show. So I'm sure they have 5. So you don't place a Great Reset book next to you by random. It's obviously signifying, without being conspiratorial at all, it's signifying some kind of allegiance, like wearing the cross, wearing the swastika, wearing the Star of David. It's signifying a certain allegiance. So having the Great Reset, it signifies a certain allegiance to that agenda. And you, Professor Muller, you wrote that the Great Reset, as new as it is to public consciousness, actually originates in the very inception of the United Nations. And you wrote this article, which I'm going to link below. But please, in your own words, take us through the gist of it, as they say.
Well, the origin actually goes much further back. With the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species, a new look at the world happened, and this idea of evolution, which at that time was seen as improvement, better fit to the environment, and Darwin wrote a lot. His whole book is about how to breed certain pigeons, how to breed this and that, how to breed this and that. So people, you of course usually don't read the book, but when I read it, and so it's full of these details of breeding, to show how these things developed. So to think that he was a scientist who studied development, evolution, is somewhat problematic. So it is more a theory about breeding, which is very important. Now, he found several followers and adherents, and it's often the case that these pupils are more radical than the original father, the original genius, and they radicalized it even more, and they focused on this idea. If it's possible with animals, why don't we accelerate? Yes, this idea of acceleration as the evolution of humans. And this then, by Galton, who was even related to Darwin, who had huge influence on statistical investigation and all these things, the study of intelligence and so on, emerged at the same time the idea of eugenics. Yes, so to create a certain type of human beings, also by leaving out, eliminating the less adaptable or less efficient kind of people. And so the eugenics movement became very strong and attracted many of the famous minds in Britain in the late 19th and early 20th century, names like John Maynard Keynes. He was a convinced eugenicist. George Bernard Shaw, the writer, who publicly, it was actually filmed, and one can check it up, who said we need a form of humane gas. That's what he said, a humane gas to do away with people who are not productive enough. He suggested that like you have to pay your taxes annually, you have to show up at a kind of board, and they examine your contribution to society, and if you fail, you're getting eliminated. So you have this social scoring idea already, yes, in the early 20th century. And in the United States, it gained track also with economists, particularly as the new technocrats, the technocrats for society, for the economy. Yes. And from there, of course, it was very close connected. There were huge intensive cooperation already before the Nazi took power between England, United States, and Germany. So there's a huge exchange has been going on about these ideas, and of course it got a twist. But that was already earlier the twist towards racism. What will be the ideal human? Yeah, what kind of type would that be? Yes, and then something, and parallel to that was the other movement, which also has huge historical roots, to achieve a world government. and this kind of the world organization, which failed first with the League of Nations and came back as
Wow,
the United
wow,
Nations.
that was quite a headful. What I want to restate that you said is that the history of eugenics, it's lost to most people. But one only needs to read the works of Chesterton, who's a brilliant English writer,
Yes, yes.
very mild, very middle of the road, very Christian, very believing, very funny,
He
witty,
opposed, yeah.
intelligent writer of the time. And he talks against eugenics, but through reading him, you understand what a movement eugenics must have been. Eugenics must have been,
Yes.
like communism was in other eras. It was something to be reckoned with. Yet today, if you just ask the random person on the street, what do you know of the history of eugenics? They immediately think Adolf Hitler, and it seems from what you say that Adolf Hitler was almost like the bad cousin of people whom we considered to be on the good side, yet their opinions were not that far in terms of how people should be treated like cattle, essentially, right? So it's almost like the figure of Hitler has obscured our view of this project of eugenics to such a degree that when we find some connection to something like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we consider it a conspiracy. Like, how can these people be eugenics? Only Hitler was a eugenicist. But this is not so, right?
Yes, and even worse, of course, Hitler movement delegitimized eugenics, but even in the 50s, it was still practice in countries that you would not put on your screen about that. And it's documented that it was practiced as eugenics in Sweden. And it was practiced and applied in the United States, in various states. It was a state object, a state subject, to better improve the nation, and it was practiced on a pretty large scale. Sterilization, and there were movements, and now we come to foundations, that at that time was the Ford Foundation. Yes, the Ford Foundation, who also tried to move this kind of racial hygienic or whatever to Africa and Latin America. So and let's do the intellectual roots not forget. There is a statement by the great, famous, probably not great, but famous economist John Maynard Keynes, who says eugenics and the study of eugenics is the most important part of the social sciences. So that's quite a statement, yes, and a surprising statement for many people. So it was quite common, and then you had. Has been a long plan before that to establish a world community. It failed with the League of Nations, but was reignited after the Second World War with the United Nations. Now, they had this sub-organization of the UNESCO, Education and Science, and there a eugenicist, a declared eugenicist, Julian Huxley, the brother of Aldous Huxley, who was the famous writer, became the first director. And in his inaugural speech, he was quite clear about that, what had to be done. And he said, first, of course, we must create education and so on. And he pronounced it, let's say, but this efforts of science, education, does not fit for everybody. So what do we do with these unusual, superfluous groups. And he wrote in the middle of the 40s, late 40s, after the Second World War. Now we cannot really come out with this idea so clearly. But it must be, and well, you can call it conspiracy, but he said it must be a hidden agenda.
Yeah, no, like one thing, like, before we go even deeper, that you touched upon, and I just want to comment on that, is that, back before the Second World War, when these first eugenicists had their agenda, even when Hitler had his agenda, obviously the means to eradicate segments of the population and manipulate others are evil to a common sense man like Chesterton, hopefully like ourselves, and most of the people listening. But at least we have to grant them that they had a grand vision. In other words, they knew what type of person they wanted to bring. Like Hitler had this idea of the Aryan race, which is as unhistorical as his version was. It was an idea. It was like a character in a fiction film, this tall, blonde, muscular. From what I understand, intelligence was not like the primary attribute of this Aryan, but that's for another discussion, I guess. But anyway, very strong in body, character, will, etc. He had an idea. What I find particularly strange, apart from evil, which is common to the old and new eugenicists, is that today we have a technology that these old eugenicists did not have, in an age where we don't really know what to do with it. I mean, these new eugenicists, what is their ideal, I wonder? Is it the tall blonde? Is it the short fat? Is it black? Is it white? What is it exactly that because they don't strike me as very imaginative or noble in character and vision. They're no artists or poets. They're not even scientists, most of them, someone like Bill Gates, for instance. So isn't this a very strange position we find ourselves in, and even more dangerous?
Well, they now don't use anymore the term eugenics or eugenicist, but the new term that was created is called transhumanism. Now, this movement appears under this word transhumanism, and it has gained a massive following under this new term. It's the same thing, but with this new term, it is absolutely legitimized. So it seems. And you mentioned Klaus Schwab at the beginning and the reset, and he is quite representative of this movement and openly speaks about that, and he calls it the fourth industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution, according to these people, will be not just as we have it now, that our technology is a kind of extension, yes, like my glasses, they are apart from my body. The computer, the cell phone is still apart from my body. The car is apart from my body. Also, I can feel very close to it, and I'm lost without my glasses or something like that. But the new idea now from transhumanism is the following: that the human being really merges with technology. So they think about one thing, this merger, to implant certain chips in your brain that, in case you are blind or have difficulties to see, allow you to see. Yes, so this kind of idea is behind that. This kind of vision is behind that. So implants, all kinds of implants that can go so far that this implant in your brain connects you with the internet, and instead of doing your research, like in front of you is the screen and so on, and you put in Google, just by the waves or whatever of your brain, you search the internet for answer. It's like imagine, as everybody knows, you are in a discussion. Oh, some name is lacking me. Yes, I wanted this movie star. It was so this would not happen anymore. You would all of these things present or and so on, and this is one side, and the other side is that you can also move your body or your brain into the technology. This is the idea that you can become immortal by loading up your brain in terms of its existence. So, like this vision that, well, you may physically die, but your brain is still there, and your daughter and sons and grandchildren can actually you upload your brain, and they can talk in their grandfather, and all these visions are present and worked on that. And then you have this other idea that huge part of the physical production will be done by robots. Yes, so you don't need workers. Yes, you don't need the mass of workers. You even have what is now a huge part, like say a person who cleans homes and so on. You have nanotechnology. You have little instruments that you put on your window, and this washes automatically the window and all this stuff. These are the idea, and a kind of also medical progress that we could get close to immortality. Yeah. Now, this is all fine and good, but it has the dark side.
Yes, and yes, and we could talk about the dark side. Just one more technical, less serious perhaps, but more technical. Talking with a professor of economics such as yourself about something I have not grasped. You know, this idea of machines doing our work, which is very old, it's as old as the Industrial Revolutions, came together with the idea that because labor is being supplanted, people should be given some kind of, I guess you could call it, universal basic income. So, you know, the extreme case of that is that if no one needs to work and we have machines to do everything, and a small group of people just maintaining those machines, if we have not built other machines to maintain the machines, etc. Let's say you always need some kind of people, but maybe it's going to be 3% of the population, 97% is going to be technically unemployed. And what happens in this case economically?
Well, this is a very, very interesting question. And of course, it is told, if we talk about this group, and we can identify this group, just call it World Economic Forum. They're all there. They're all visible. You can see the list of the persons who are there, and you have this kind of techno leadership. And if I say they, I can refer to these guys, and you can name them, and many of them are very well known. The point is that for this reset, for this transition, I mean, you cannot, you have to include, to seduce, entice a large part of the population. And now I'm getting a little bit dark. What is happening right now? I mean, those people who were up to 2020 still largely self-employed, small cafes, shops, and so on, are put out of their existence with a lockdown. In Germany, for example, this very agreeable inner city atmosphere in Munich and so on, where you could walk around and you have thousands of small shops and so on with all you can go inside. You had at first, this is already gone, even before the lockdowns, you had bookstores and so on, record stores at my time and so on. So these are moved out of their existence. This is coming, and they become dependent, and now they have their old, let's say, pride or self-esteem, and they have huge difficulties to apply for social assistance, for welfare. Now this group, WEF, WEF, offers them a basic income without any application additional. So you lose this mark of being a parasite. Yes. So now you have their support. Of course they will cry. This former shopkeeper, this former waiter and so on, yes, will cry, yes, 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 we want that. But the point is, when they will get this basic income, it will be extremely small, and it is a way to, let's now be really dark, to phase out this population. Yes. So you restrict their living. It's already very strong to, instead of sterilization, you mistreat those people, their children. Now in Europe and the United States, it's almost a terror for these children. So people will lose the desire to have children, and additionally, they will not have the funds to maintain them, and so living close to subsistence level. And the idea is to phase them out. And now comes the interesting point. Why does this program, so to speak, concentrate on countries like particularly the United States, Australia, which is very, very interesting, yes, Germany, United Kingdom, yes, and other parts of Europe. Yes, because when they collapse, when they reduce their economy to a mechanized, yes, the third world will vanish anyway. Yes, you have this part that's left, China, but Japan now. So this is another story that emerges. Yes, but huge parts of Africa and other so-called developing countries won't get any more certain knowledge that is essential for them to survive, and you will have also a kind of withering away of the population, and it's a program called depopulation. This is also very, very obvious in a lot of literature. You can read about that.
And one thing to note, to add is, I was reading a book called The Suicide of the West, which was written in the 60s, and it has not come to my attention as of late, but a friend of mine recommended it, and it's a great book. If people have read books that criticize liberalism, I think that's the place to start, because it was written so early, and it's very interesting. I'm not going to get into it, but it's very interesting for many different reasons, because the author takes a very measured approach. He's not trying to uncover some dark agenda, but he says, actually, in this book, he says, if I were Socrates, I would call what I'm about to present as inductive reasoning. In other words, he starts from the outside. He sees liberals and asks the questions, who are they? Who are the liberals? And he answers in various ways. In what are their beliefs? And then he goes to say, again, it's a funny chapter, because it's near the end, and it says, again, column, who are the liberals? And he says, okay, we've answered this in terms of ideology, but now we're going to answer in terms of demographics, like who are they? Are they the rich, the poor, the women, the men? And he concludes quite convincingly that the more dependent you are on the state, the more you're going to have these liberal values. And by liberal, we don't mean libertarian, we don't mean true liberal enlightenment, we mean this new liberal halfway between communist, woke agenda, third wave feminism. You're an Islamophobe if you speak against mass migration. This kind of liberal, this kind of liberal, this kind of leftist liberal, and this kind of liberal. It seems demographically that it's far less prevalent on the owners and small entrepreneurs, essentially. The big entrepreneurs, the Jeff Bezos, who knows what they tell their wives, right? But in public, they're as liberal as anyone, but the small entrepreneurs, like my family, they were always much more conservative, not liberal. And so what you're saying is that as people lose their small cafes, you don't need to be, again, a big entrepreneur. You just need to have this first-hand touch of the market to know what taxation means, what inflation means, what migration means practically on the street, to know these things. Then you're not as liberal, or you're less liberal than if you. And so as this change happens from small owners to essentially state employees on pension leaves, people are going to be. It's a vicious cycle. They're going to be more indoctrinated by this agenda, which creates the problem in the first place. They're going to be more willing to accuse each other of being conspiracy theories, just as there is an agenda to, like you said, fade them away. So it's a very sad prospect, right? This loss of ownership.
Yes, I think this is a terrible thing that's happening. It's a forced proletarization that is going on, a proletarization initiated by governments. I mean, the vision, the prognosis of Karl Marx, terribly failed. Capitalism created, yes, a strong, prosperous middle class, where you have ever better paid workers. You had this huge part of the ownership middle class, yes, up to the more educated people who were managers and so on. So this was a huge part of the society and gave all stability to it, and it spread around the world. You had a similar with all over where this kind of capitalism came to. You had this spread, an extension of the middle class, and now what we have the reverse, but this reverse is not the result of capitalism, it's a result of government policies. You had this first part of that. Who made, what kind of policy created now these hyper-rich people? These hyper-rich people cooperated and are cooperating very strongly with the government. The World Economic Forum is the connection. The World Economic Forum does not invite a shopkeeper from Munich, but invites Angela Merkel, and on the other hand invites Bill Gates. So they have formed this new elite. Yes, and while the others have no voice. And now you have this other strange thing over the, well, actually since 2000, more than 20 years, you have a monetary policy which favors the owner of these big companies. I mean, for them it is absolutely easy to
get a loan,
borrow, yes, get a loan in mega dimensions, because they first do not have to care about interest rates. They're almost zero in the United States, in the Eurozone, yes. And then they can buy up more and more of the innovative companies. I mean, this is the growth of Microsoft, yeah, buying up all these companies. So you have a created monopolization, and that other thing that destroys the commercial, let's call it that commercial middle class, is, as you mentioned before, taxation and regulation. I mean, you have you have a small amount to declare, but the work to declare that is as huge as for a big company which has millions or billions to declare and cope with regulations. So regulation, taxation, and monetary policy kills the commercial middle class.
And talking about books, there's another book called None Dare Call It a Conspiracy. But you know, back to the UN, because I left a thread open. I interrupted you too early in one case, and you were mentioning how this eugenics agenda that just could morphed into these organizations. And I'm just going to read something from your article, which I have in front of me, in where you say, well, I'm going to find it. So you say, at the launch of the organization, Huxley called for a, quote, scientific world humanism, global in extent, and asked to manipulate human evolution to a desirable end, referring to dialectical materialism as the first radical attempt at an evolutionary philosophy. The director of UNESCO laments that the Marxist approach to changing society was bound to fail because its lack of an indispensable biological component. Okay, so a rough translation of that would mean that Marxist had it right, but he did not calculate human nature. And now we are in this great moment in history where instead of changing the theory to comply with we change human nature to comply with the theory, right?
Exactly. The Marxist movement, the communist movement, up to when it started to be put in practice, banked on the idea, with the change of the environment, from capitalism to socialism, a new man, a new human being would surge. Che Guevara in the Cuban Revolution preached it. We will, with this revolution, we will have the new man, the new human being to emerge, who is no longer egoistical, who is no longer only concerned with himself, who now will turn altruistic. And of course, this failed, and Huxley says that this plan failed, but now we have a quite different way to do that. We will change this human being directly, in a direct manner, not by changing the environment, but if this discussion, environment
nature versus
or
nature,
heritage, nature, yes, we do not bank on changing the environment. We change the human first, and then the environment will change.
Yeah.
Yes, and so the technology is there. We pretty much know about the laws of this genetic mechanism of genetics, not to confuse with eugenics. No, this genetical stuff is very well known, very much advanced. And you have also this amazing progress in the, let's call them more electronic technology. Yes, and this is this amazing transhumanist vision that appears to really create what Marxism has promised.
What do they find so attractive in Marxism? Because obviously the people who are moving this transhumanist agenda are super capitalists themselves. They're no,
Yes,
but they
yeah,
find they
that
find
is
something really attractive to Marxism.
yes, yes, that is a very, very important point, a good question, because we have talked a number of movements. There's also another movement, and it was, and it's returned now, very strong in the United States. It's expertocracy, the rule of experts. That was the great vision that emerged in the United States. They were highly influential. They had huge congresses, and it was a really strong movement that a group of experts, of enlightened people, yes, will now manage the economy and the society. Yes, societal and economic control. It was highly attractive to the economists to join in. So we are, besides, okay, you do your business, you are the business manager, but we economists, with the help of other social studies, are the managers of the whole economy. And so this expertocracy was really a strong movement, and it wanted to organize society by these theoretical standards. And as to your question, one of these leading representatives said once, "We are left of communism." We are to the left of communism. I mean, communist idea are weak compared to our expertocracy vision. Yes. So let's put it this way. Lenin said, "Okay, what is communism? It is like organizing a post office, a national post office. Whole Russia will be one factory." Yes, and of course it terribly failed, but with these guys now comes this again, and they think, erroneously, I believe, that now with the computer technology you really can do that, like the limitation you had to companies because the lack of information. Now we can have much more capacity to use information and work with information. We can have larger companies and so on. And now we are close to a level to do that for the whole economy, for planning the whole economy. And now, just to make it even more drastic, the Keynes, the general theory, yes, published his book in 1936. And in 1936, the same year, appeared the German translation. And in this German translation, John Maynard Keynes wrote a preface, and he praised the Nazi regime, as this was much more capacitated, had much more capacity to apply my ideas, to control, as he called it more or less, control the aggregates of the economy. It's an amazing foreword, a foreword to the first German edition that you can find looking up, and it is really shows this kind of mentality that is behind these movements.
It seems to be like a passion for control, right?
Passion for control, for power. I think it is power. I'm writing a book now, first in German, where I try to say, well, you have a desire for knowledge. And in this desire for knowledge, you do not dominate other people. You look yourself, you feel yourself in need of knowledge and so on. So you want money, you have a greed for money. Okay, now produce goods that you can sell. But what is the greed for power? The third, maybe essential human desire and greed. This means you have to dominate other people. This is quite a different aspects of greed, yes, than the others have. And this may actually be the case for people who are so full with wealth that they now feel the desire to exert power for the in the name of the power.
Yeah, and in our last interview, you brought in some metaphysics, which I find important because you mentioned that there's a almost satanic dimension to this whole thing, and I'm not shy of these things. I'm not very believing myself in that true orthodox way, but I find that Christianity has a more adequate vocabulary sometimes when it comes to the nature of evil. I think that modern man, especially liberal man, who in a certain sense believes in the goodness of man, he's a disciple of Rousseau more than he understands, is almost blind to the idea of radical evil, that there can be evil for evil's sake, that someone can be motivated by purely evil motives. The modern man is blind to this. He can only think of desires being satisfied, like you mentioned, the first, second, third in rank, but just evil in the way, some characters in the Bible are. He's incapable to do. Yet there is something to that vocabulary, and I'm going to add one more thing. I mean, just using our eyes, as I suggest most people do, and looking around. One reason why it appears satanic to me, again, without being a believer in, Satan first, in the objective existence of Satan. One reason why it appears satanic is that it has a strange, almost comical dimension. Not comical as in laugh out loud, funny, because it's not funny. It's rather tragic because of the destruction of private business that you mentioned before. But it has this satirical element. I mean, anything from articles suggesting the wearing of masks during sex, second and third masks being used in gyms, to the dances. People listening might remember back in 2020, March, April, around then, there were these videos surfacing on TikTok and they were never disproven, they seem genuine. For all I know, they are genuine, of nurses in big hospitals in the United Kingdom doing these synchronized dances. Just when we were taught that hospitals are inundated with COVID patients and nurses are running 24/7 to save them, you had these videos on TikTok with nurses on empty wards, by the way. I mean, it's online, you can see it, doing these synchronized dances. Too synchronized to be random. I was talking about this with a friend, and we said, if me and you, if they paid us to do a synchronized dance, would probably look much worse than these people, which means they must have been rehearsed somewhere. So there's this absurdity which is almost comical, which reminds of just what you'd expect from a satanic dimension. That's dark, it's evil, it looks very powerful, but it has this satirical aspect to it. Like, how much of your thinking is influenced by Christian metaphysics, to put it like that?
Well, I would mention two things here. One is that we have concentrated very much on Darwin and this direction. But there has always been, and it is dominated, it is science, Darwin is science. But in fact, there is an anarchist author, Piotr Kropotkin, who was a scientist, who worked as a scientist. And he made, before he turned himself pronounced anarchist and had problem with the Russian government, he was funded by the Tsar to investigate large parts of Siberia. And he made a journey like Darwin. Yes, he traveled all along with a huge entourage and with measurements, with instruments, details, and he observed, he registered. He was a natural scientist, as they called it at that time, quite similar to Darwin's voyage on the Challenger, where he investigated Galapagos and so on. Now, Kropotkin comes back from his empirical research with quite a different idea of evolution. And it does not show up. It does not show up in the textbook. It is not taught in the schools, because what he found is quite simple, and we all know it. Yes, as a pure competitor who just looks for himself, you won't go anywhere. I mean, he found out that even in the animal world, cooperation, love, let's call it loving, because to get this religious side in, yeah, community, yeah, is a much larger aspect of survival. So he would not deny competition. Yes, but he says in order to survive this communitarian, he called it mutual aid aspect, yeah, is just as important. Yes, and well, and I as I teach economics, I try to get this over, because here they hate capitalism because capitalism is competition. I say, well, okay, let's look at a bakery. What is competition at a bakery? It's almost no competition, because he needs cooperation with the companies that supplies flour, the people who sells to, and he will respect maybe these other, like in the coffee shop area and so on. They respect each other, but they cooperate in their small world, so to speak. And now we go to, let's say, to a football league. I mean, you have huge competition, but who wins? Does the team win, which among itself is pure competition? No, the team will win, which cooperates as a team in the best possible way. And even beyond that, you have the whole organization, the FIFA or whatever, or the Champions League stuff. You have to work together to make this competition happen. And this idea is totally lost. And it is actually basically, as you mentioned, a basically Christian idea. Yes, a basically Christian idea that opposes the pure, brutal, competitive force that was very strong at the height of the Roman Empire, where you just had to kill each other, and they lost this aspect of cooperation. I see. If you look at the Christendom in a way of anarchism and Christian and economics, it is cooperation as the other side. Yes, and this is very much opposed to what you see when you put forth this egotistical survival of the fittest. Yes, the survival of the fittest. Yes, as it was called, or fight for living space. Yes, these are these crazy ideas that came out of Darwin, and they are totally wrong. Yes. So why? Let's put it in a very drastic form. Yes. Why do nations invade other nations when there's a much better form to make trade, to do trade?
Yes. Well,
yes, a cooperation.
I mean, Darwin
yes?
was a Victorian after all, and he carried, I think, a lot of the ideas. And he was, like you mentioned at the beginning, a eugenicist. I mean, he was very clear at the idea of. I think, if I remember the quote directly, he wrote as if almost mad at the idea that while we can put, a donkey to sleep if it's defective, why we can't put people to sleep? He said we're just weakening our race, the human race, by not, quote unquote, putting people to sleep. but now it has been, yeah. But back to, just because we just did not, I guess, focus on the religious aspect. Like, could there be a more organizing force around these seemingly random events that are happening as of the pandemic, like even beyond any kind of conspiracy? Like, is it helpful at least to use some of that Christian vocabulary, you think?
Well, you mentioned Chesterton, who opposed this movement from a basically a Christian basis. This is one of the aspects. And the other is that this other streak, which opposes, let's say, Christianity, has also a long tradition. Some time ago, I wrote an article about the movement of Frankism. It is largely forgotten. It was a huge movement in Europe, and the texts by Jacob Frank, actually this Polish famous writer, woman writer, wrote, who won the Nobel Prize, wrote a novel about it. And so he proclaimed that to gain Jacob's ladder, yes, Stairway to Heaven, to say it in the pop music, Stairway to Heaven. Yes, it's very interesting, this connection. And Jacob Frank says that it was before the French Revolution at this time. Yes, he lived in Poland and then all of Eastern Europe, and then Frankfurt, Germany, Wiesbaden and Paris. Yes, very interesting. Also with a stay in Vienna, where he seemed to have convinced the Austrian king or head of the states there. And then he said, no, this is totally wrong. Yes, we have to step down the ladder. We have to practice evil. We have to practice so much evil. And now comes this satanic turn, yes, that God can no longer look at us and will come. So it has a very strange philosophy that has attracted many people in the period before the French Revolution, and some say it has been very instrumental for the French and American Revolution, partly much more for the French Revolution, that we need a very, very evil world to come to the better world, that we need destruction. And also it's very interesting when we look at our modern time or recent events that are somewhat in all kinds of press, but also hidden, that you need to perform as the strongest insult to the Creator. Yes. To do perverse sexual acts. So what is the worst sexual acts you can commit?
Pedophilia, I guess.
And it's pedophilia, exactly. Nah? So you can look it up. It's in the papers. It's all over. There will be a judgment in New York in right now, and so on. So it's all there, and it's obvious, but no, it's not in the mainstream in any way, in any strong form to know what is going on. And this Frankist movement also obliges the adherents to much more silence. It's the strictest rule. Keep silent about what you want to do. Yes. So that you are this frank. That's about your true intentions. You show up in the public as another person. Yes, like a Bill Gates. Let's call it this way: that you do the best for the world, and as you mentioned, this satanic transformation. They said, "Okay, yes, we give you the vaccination for your health. Yes, we will do all the best for you. We will give you an income." But behind that may be something quite different. We want to have equality. Yes, we want to eliminate racism and so on. But in fact, they create this tension. The highest pleasure for them probably would be when there will be huge civil wars. That would be the highest achievement in the minds of
they're
that.
guiding it. And just on that note, because a lot of what we say, sounds fictional. I found this connection of Julian Huxley that you mentioned being the head of the first director, rather, of the United Nations, and Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World. It's a very strange connection because there you have two brothers kind of working towards a new world government, one in fantasy, in writing, Brave New World, and the other in action. So and of course I can imagine them at the dinner table. I mean, I don't know exactly their relationship, but I can imagine them just exchanging ideas about the future of mankind, and knowing that one was the fiction writer and the other. It's all, I spoke with a hypnotist on one of my interviews that I'm going to publish, and he said that he recognized a lot of his techniques in the propaganda that we're witnessing. And he said that one thing is you can somehow prepare your target's mind to accept an idea by just showing them, just preparing the building blocks, I guess, the concepts before you get to the idea. So maybe you'll say, don't drink too much alcohol, but already you bring the idea of alcohol, the possibility of drinking alcohol is there. Don't get too much drunk, and then one could push you towards actually drinking more alcohol, although they said don't. But you have already the image, the possibility opens up that there is something called alcohol. You can drink few, you can drink too much, etc. So it's almost like you can imagine that Brave New World, although a dystopia, it was the not drink alcohol type of statement, prepared the minds of many to the possibility that, we could be living in a very tightly top-down controlled world. It's one of the options. It's one realistic option, right? Do you see any connection there?
Yes, I see that. That is a quite important point. In many aspects, mentioning certain things, don't do it, yes, ignites actually the aspect. I've never thought about that, doing it. Now I know I can do it. Well, why didn't I do it? Yes, and there's also beyond that the apparatus of propaganda from Bernays. This American author who was a relative of Sigmund Freud, yes, who had his whole book called Propaganda, where he highlights the various aspects you have to do, and his basic idea was that, and you can also observe that. You cannot control, it's just too much, the whole mass of the people. But you don't do it, you don't need to do it. Just use a couple of opinion leaders, a few number of stars, movie stars or so on, and get them on board, yes, and use them, and they have their followers. And you can also see that right now happening, that they make clips to get injections and so on by some kind of famous people and so on. I done it, you done it, you do it. Yes, it has this following aspect. And of course you have the historically documented observations that all over the world, once in a while, whole society become absolutely crazy. They are documented events where some kind of collective psychosis affects people, and they do the most strange things, and it also goes away overnight.
Yes.
There's an interesting book about that would I like comment to your hearers, to your listeners. Sharevich, about all these movements that he put all under the mark of socialism, collectivism, socialism. I think the English title is simply socialism, and in German it's called they use the Freudian term, the drive for death. Der Todestrieb, the drive for death in history, which is even better title, I feel. Yes, because as you know, Freud also talked about the human psyche as having a part of the drive to death. Yes, the Todestrieb in German, and the title that they used for the German translation is the drive for death in history, which was very, very appropriate. And what I would say is that has been limited because of lack of global communication, and even within the different nations, to a regional group, and could not even affect the whole nation. Now, with 20th century, you had these craziness affect whole nations. Yes, most famous example is Nazism. Yes, where a whole nation goes berserk, goes crazy. Yes, and now we may experience the first time of a global psychosis, where almost all around the globe you have this hysteria. And like in the past, there has always been a relatively small group who became relatively unaffected by it. The societies recovered after, because this craziness by this mass of people usually also stopped overnight.
Well, that is a hopeful message, because one of the things that is very characteristic of this particular madness is that for the likes of me, I cannot see a way out right now. But that actually, what you mentioned is a ray of hope, because if it is a form of mass psychosis, as I believe it is, it can stop overnight. It almost reminds me of Euripides' play Bacchae, where the women of Thebes get into this Dionysiac ecstasy,
Exactly.
and then after the destruction is over,
yes. I think that is very important to close with this idea that it's known in history. You mentioned the Greek drama, where it is, and the amazing thing that it is like closing of the mind, and it stops almost overnight. Yes, and we have examples of that. I mean, the moment that Hitler was gone, Germany was totally different. Until nowadays, I mean, how can that be? I mean, just imagine, how can that be? Yes, this was a collective psychosis, and there have always been quite a large amount of people who opposed it. Not to forget, that was never a totality, or in the Soviet communism, you always has the dissidents, but the main craziness was so strong, and the human nature does not like to be excluded.
Absolutely,
So
yeah.
there
And
is
there's,
this,
there's this
yeah.
picture that keeps resurfacing for the right reasons on the internet, which is from, I guess, a Hitler rally, where there's a picture and there's about 100, 200 people depicted, all doing the Nazi salute, apart from one man. I don't know if they identified who that person is, but it's funny because there's one person who just has his hands crossed in a mass of people, and everyone that I know always thought that there would be this one man. But there's something ironic that the vast majority of people believe that they're going to take a stance that traditionally only the minority has taken, right? So it's easy to spot a new Hitler if he wears the swastika, if he wears the red cross. It's a different story. Most people are probably going to be
Exactly.
doing the
Yes.
whatever salute, whatever crazy dance in empty hospital wards. Professor Anton Müller, it's been great to have this conversation again with you. I hope it's going to be, well, not one of many, two of many in the future. So if you want to say something last, or I'll thank you again.
Well, thank you so much. Has been a pleasure talking to you. I really liked our conversation, and you opened up my mind for some more provocative theses. But we should bring the message out, and actually it is now, as we are already in the second phase or third phase of that what has been happening, that it's now easier. Now it's not so easy to put away some critical thoughts as saying, "Oh, you're crazy. You're denying everything." That was very difficult in the first part of the last year. But now you have more and more people opening up a mind, and we have several elections going on. This is also a kind of change that suddenly an eye opener will appear. So let's hope so in this way.
Absolutely. Let's hope it's going to be like the bike hike, just one go, one look at the sky. It took, and the spell.
Study the Greek
Yes.
dramas.
Yes.
Or tragedies.
Absolutely.
Tragedies.
Absolutely.
Tragedies.
Thank
Okay.
you very much. Speak again.
Thank you.
And people
My pleasure.
listening, stay safe, but most importantly, stay free.